tell us a little bit about the history of the museum, and then rather than me talk about the things that my daughter likes there and that we interact with, tell us like about some of the things you guys are doing and featuring, and even to that point, like how do you guys interact with play and learning and all that?
Sure.
Tell us all about your museum.
Gosh, there's a lot there. I remember, I'll share a little anecdote first. So when I first announced that I was leaving Habitat to go to the Iowa Children's Museum, I had, first of all, it was completely unexpected for the people who I knew and was close to in Cedar Rapids, who had worked with very passionately with Habitat. And they're like, oh, they were upset first of all, but then they were like, why? And I'm like, it's just, you've got to see this place. There's just something so special about it, and obviously near and dear to my heart because my kid's going there, much like yours, Adam. But one individual said, "What does what does that mean? It's like like artwork made by kids or for kids or whatever." And
kids in cages that you go around and look at.
I guess I don't know.
Stuffed children throughout the years.
But I get it. Well, I didn't go there, but that's an interesting. But it is an interesting thing to think about. Like, how do you explain to somebody who has never been to a children's museum what it is? But really, the children's museum, I think the Boston Children's Museum claims to be like 100 years old, and kind of the original one. So this concept of creating a space for kids to thrive and explore. We say imagine, create, discover, and explore is kind of our tagline. And we talk about the power of play and all these things. This is not a new concept, and there have been children's museums for decades in our country. And obviously, I think if you look at the kind of trend line, there are many more in probably the past 30 years. Our museum is just over 20 years old.
Okay.
So it's definitely become something, I'd say, in the past 20 to 30 years where you've seen a real proliferation of the number of museums that are out there. But really the concept of a children's museum, and they're all over the map in terms of how they function and what their exhibits are like, what age demographic that they aim for. But really the idea is back to that notion of informal learning, that this is a place for kids to, as we say, imagine, create, discover, and explore, and really put those concepts that maybe they're learning in early childhood education and then the elementary years, that they can come into our space and they can play and learn while they play. And so we've been around just over 20 years, like I said. Started our first actual exhibit was in the old Sycamore Mall in Iowa City, which is now the Iowa City Marketplace. And so it was a temporary, I think, traveling exhibit that the founders of the museum, who were two young ladies in the area, and they were just passionate about this concept of children's museums and had been to some of them growing up. Their parents had taken them to them. And it was really their idea to launch this thing in the Iowa City area. And then when the Coral Ridge Mall came online in 1998, they took their concept and said, we've got a little bit of experience under our belts and we want to make this thing bigger and better. And they talked the Coral Ridge Mall property owners. At that time, I think it was General Growth Properties. It's now Brookfield Properties. But they made a trip to Chicago, and they said, they pitched their idea, and they said, we need space. We need you to partner with us. There's obviously a lot more involved in that than that. But they eventually agreed and gave them the opportunity to completely retrofit this space to make it a unique space for a children's museum. And the one stipulation, as I understand it, is that they would open the museum within a year of the Coral Ridge Mall opening. So Sure enough, in November 16th of 1999, the museum opened in the mall. So we'll celebrate our 20th anniversary in the mall this November 16th, which happens to be a Saturday. So for all of your viewers and listeners out there, we'll have a free admission day on Saturday, November 16th, where everybody can come experience it. And so, and it's just grown from there. So it wasn't like on day one, all the exhibits as you see them with your daughter, Adam, it was all completely fully realized. It took time.
Sure.
So a lot of those exhibits have been there in some form since day one, but there were big empty spaces too that just, when the funding came through and when they were able to garner the support to build it out, and it's just evolved over the years into what it is now, which is this informal learning laboratory for kids. We say birth to age 12. Okay. Birth is kind of tough. It's tough to have a newborn in our space, but I think the idea by saying birth to 12 is you've got your daughter who's 4, right?
To be 4 soon, yeah.
So maybe you've got another child that comes along with your daughter. They can at least experience that environment and be there with the family. And a lot of it is about those family relationships and the social aspect that comes with being in that environment that is immersive and nurturing, and everything has a purpose. I remember one of the first tours that I took with our assistant director, Amy, who's been there for many, many years, and just does a tremendous job at the museum. And I thought I understood the museum pretty well. I've been there with my kids, but this was very early in my tenure as the director. And we were going around, and she was leading a tour, and I was just kind of listening to hear all the things that I could steal from her presentation. And we were at the pizzeria, which I'm sure you know well, Adam.
I do.
And my kids love that. That was one of their favorite things, probably still is, and they're 8 and almost 11. And she said, this is a great exhibit, and we focus on equal shares and all these different concepts. She's talking about fractions. We were thinking about the pizza and how, and I'm doing a terrible job of explaining it right now, but she went into this whole litany of things. I was like, oh my gosh, we're doing a lot with this simple.
I would never
simple
thought of that.
exhibit here.
I've been there 100 times. You're right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. I wouldn't have thought of that.